Okay, so here is journal 62, and in this journal we're going to be talking about sequences and series. Now, sequences should be something you've heard about. It's basically you have this order list of numbers, or you can think of it as this string of numbers that have a pattern to getting each term. And so in this case, we have a few examples here to work with, and we got to figure out the pattern so we can fill in the blank space so we can figure out what the next term is. So in this case, take a look at the sequence and see if you can figure out the pattern. Okay, so when I take a look at this first sequence here, I notice that the numbers jump in signs. I'm going from positive to negative, and they're also doubling. So in this case, what I notice is that it's being multiplied by -2 each time, and it's consistent. So in this case, when I get to this -16, if I multiply this by -2, I get +32, and I figured out my next term. And I can do this on and on, however many I need. And so I'm going to try it with this one here. I'm going to take a look at the pattern. So I'm going from 8 to 5, then 2 to -1. So I think this is decreasing or subtracting by 3. So if I take my -1 and subtract by 3, I get -4. And I figured out my next term. Okay, so hopefully this sounds familiar. We're going to be doing this a lot in the next few days. So I just wanted to give you kind of like a refresher on how we figure out sequences. All right, now let's talk about series. So series are basically the terms of the sequence being added together, okay? So think about it this way. Let's say that you have this sequence, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So here's your sequence, and basically, you guys probably will notice that this sequence is increasing by 2, right? It's adding 2 every time. Okay, so that's the pattern of our sequence. So what a series does is it sums up the sequence. So if we were to sum up the sequence, we would add up all these string of numbers, and if you add them all up, let's see, 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus 10, that's going to give you 30. So series, what they do is they take the terms that you have in a given sequence and they add them all up, and that's your series. So in mathematics, we can actually represent a series with what we call a summation notation. So let's take a look at this notation here. It has this weird E symbol, and this actually comes from the Greek alphabet, sigma. And this representation in mathematics just means the sum. So we're summing up something. And so let's talk about the 3 components that are attached to it. So this middle component is what we call, so the AN is what we call the formula or the rule. So AN represents this rule. So in this case, you saw in this sequence, it's adding by 2. So we can create a mathematical formula, or you could think of it as an expression that we can put here. And then these lower and upper things are your bounds. So this one here is what we call the lower limit. So it's going to tell us what's the first term that we start with, whereas the upper limit is the last term we end with. So I'll show you how you can use this here. So in this example, what you're trying to do is you're trying to sum up the series. What that means is like this here, remember, is your formula that you're using. this is your first term and this is your last term that you're heading towards. And so let's take a look on what we have to do here. So the first term that we start with is your 1. You start at the first term, which is 1. So notice how this is an n here and there's an n here. That means that you're going to be plugging in these numbers into the formula. So I'm going to plug in 1 into the formula first. And so what that's going to look like is 3, 1, minus 1. But this only represents the first term. This is only A1. So imagine this as being like, this is your first term in the sequence, A1. This is A2, A3, A4, A5. So the A's tell you what term they are, the subscripts tell you what position they're at. So here you can see that there are 5 terms. And so in this case, if this is going from 1 to 4, we should have 4 terms that are written here. And this is going to be the first term. The second term is going to be, what do you think it is? Well, if we started at 1 here, the next number is going to be 2. We need to find the second term. So we need to be plugging in 2 into n now. And then the next one is going to be plugging in 3 into n. And last but not least, we're going to end with plugging in 4 because we need to go to the 4th term is what this summation says. So now you can see that this here is actually a string of our sequence or a string of numbers, right? Because if you were to calculate these numbers here, let's work it out. So that would give you 3 times 1 minus 1 is going to be 3 minus 1, which is 2, plus 3 times 2 is 6, minus 1 is 5, plus 3 times 3 minus 1 is 8, plus 3 times 4 minus 1 is 11. So this string of number is just like saying the sequence is 2, 5, 8, 11. But instead, between them, instead of commas, you have plus signs because this is a series. You always add up or add the terms together in a series. That's why I have the plus signs in between those sets of brackets, because I'm adding up each number in the sequence. So if I total this up, I get 26 as my sum of this series. Okay, so that's it. We're going to be doing sequences in the next few journals, and then after we do sequences, we'll talk more about series again.